to go to therapy or to not go to therapy. If you're even asking yourself this question and you have some level of like emotional, mental trauma, the answer is likely yes. If you're at a point where you feel like you don't know where to turn, you don't have anyone who can counsel you, whether it be an actual therapist or maybe even like a spiritual counselor, if you're there and you need help and you don't know where to turn, chances are your answer is yes. I'm going to be sharing some of the things that I learned in my therapy journey that completely changed the trajectory of my entire life. When I was approximately 19 years old, I felt like I was going through so much and I emotionally did not have the bandwidth to deal with it. I think now that I'm in psychology, I've learned that like your brain doesn't fully develop until you're about 25. So I think it's really important, like whatever age you're at, that this is a step that you take if you feel like you want to change your life. One of the first topics that I wanted to learn more about and implement deeper into my life was self-love. And where I actually found the information was in here. So my therapist was a Christian counselor and he gave me this verse. He actually gave me a sheet of paper that I'll explain. I'll probably put it up on the screen and explain it. But the verse is Mark 12, verse 31, I believe. Yes. And the second is like, namely this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is none other commandment greater than these. Now, the way that he explained it to me was that the key word in that scripture is as. So loving your neighbor as you love yourself already sends the message that if you have self-love for yourself, you'll be able to give love onto other people. Now, if you don't, in the same token, if you don't have self-love for yourself, you can only love people to the capacity that you love yourself. So it has to start from within. If you're incapable of loving yourself, you will not be able to love others to that degree. That single verse changed everything for me because it kind of helped me reflect like, okay, how have I really been loving myself? And sometimes, especially when you become older, you get into like almost these situations where you're like, okay, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's, a partner, and you're like, why am I being treated like this? And in reality, it's because of the way that you've been treating yourself. So that single verse, he did go into detail, but that single verse really set the tone on my perspective of self-love. And yeah, that was literally it. The way that he explained it, the way that to implement into your life is you have to basically put yourself first. Like it sounds so typical when everyone says like, oh, fill your own cup first, but actually knowing how to do that and really feeding yourself, feeding your spirit, feeding yourself the things that you need and want out of this life will really do it for you. So the second topic of things that I wanted to work on was trusting other people, which down the line through different sessions, I realized it was really trusting myself. Like, do I have the capacity and strengthen myself to really trust people? And why is that? Where do my trust issues come from? The way that he broke it down with me in terms of relationships with other people, being able to trust people, which is something that I think is growing. I feel like society, like nobody trusts each other. Everyone's like, oh, cut this off and do this, that. Like, okay, you can play hard all you want, but like we're all humans. We all want connection. It's natural for us to want connection. It's natural for us to want to connect with other people. So like all of that is honestly just noise. But when it comes to trust issues, the main thing is you have to analyze what healthy relationships look like. So one thing that I was struggling with was like trusting, like a partner that I was with. And one of the things that he told me was trust, when you think of a healthy relationship, So for example, if you didn't come from maybe a household with healthy relationships, or maybe there's dysfunction, it kind of works, it kind of doesn't. Nobody's perfect. So when you think of healthy relationships, the main point is that in order to have a healthy relationship, one of the foundations of a healthy relationship is trust. And once trust is broken, your entire viewpoint of a person can be completely shattered. It can be broken to a point of complete isolation from that person, like you don't want anything to do with them. So he let me know, like, you're not crazy, like some of these things were messed up that happened to you, and if you're going back out there, you have to first trust yourself. You have to trust yourself when, selecting a partner. You have to trust yourself when selecting friends. You have to trust yourself with selecting who you open yourself up to, especially emotionally, because if you do it to the wrong person, you can get harmed badly. So trust, that was a big one. Trust is one of the essential parts of a relationship. If you don't have it, you can have a relationship without trust, but how healthy is it really? Can it be rebuilt? To be honest, I've never really stuck around to see. I know that sounds bad, but it's the truth. But I think being an honest person and connecting with other people who are honest, connecting with people who stay true to their word, like if they say they do something, they're going to do something, they do it. Like those are clear signs of trust. So trust was essential, and you don't really have a healthy relationship without trust. And he was really like driving that home when we spoke about it. The next thing after healthy relationships, we got into healthy boundaries. Now, this is something where if you're like an empathetic person, if you're empathetic and you open yourself up to people and you're always like, oh my gosh, like how can I help this person? Like you're kind of like a rescue, like save me person. Like I'm coming to save you. I'm coming to save you. If you're one of those people, it's kind of dangerous for you because of the situations that you might get yourself into. So healthy boundaries was something that was really important, that I needed to learn during my therapy. And it's important because if you let the wrong people in, you can be you just open the door to so much issues. Like, oof. If you Especially if with people who are empathetic. Another thing that I've noticed is a lot of Christians have this trait where just empathy to another degree. Like you could literally, which I'm honestly, it's something that I feel society now is trying to like shame, like, oh, you should be this and that, and like the rat race, the cutthroat, and this, that. Like, it's not healthy, and long term, it's not sustainable for genuine connections. So that's one thing that we talked about in terms of boundaries. And you also have to think of boundaries. Like when you start to enforce them, people are going to think like, you're shutting me out, you're closing me out. Like, who is this new you? I don't like them. But in reality, they've always been able to almost get access to you. And sometimes you really do have to change that. So it's not a matter of shutting people out. It's a matter of saying, if you're going to be in and be here and be connected with me, these are my requirements. And some people will meet them and rise up to the occasion, and some people won't. So healthy boundaries was essential because especially if you're an empathetic person, you are open to destructive energy. You are like a narcissist's breakfast. Like they're going to be like, ate that empathetic person up for breakfast. Like, it's not funny. It's really not funny, but I have to laugh because it's so uncomfortable. But you are literally a target for people who cannot deal with like problems on their own. They just kind of unload all of their issues onto you, and you go home feeling stressed. You take it on yourself. So healthy boundaries are a must. The game of life. Now, this was something that I had to really grasp. I think when he used this analogy, it was very helpful for my situation. So he described the game of like life with other people and communication styles as a game of tennis. And sometimes, you have all this equipment for tennis. Sometimes you can play tennis, sometimes you don't know how to play tennis. And one thing that he said is, especially with communication, like you got to think of it as like a back and forth. Like you communicate, you communicate, you communicate, you communicate, you communicate, you communicate. So it's almost like a give and take kind of, like that's what really relationships are. Like you're always giving, you're always taking. It's kind of just always like a back and forth. But one of the things that he said is, he said, imagine if you were like a pro athlete in tennis, and you might be a threat to the other person on the opposing team. Um, and he was basically saying sometimes when you're a threat, you're too good at the game of life and you're too good at communication. That's a threat to the other person. So they'll behave and like lash out in like insecure ways that just end up harming you. And he also gave the example of, if you are good, sometimes you might get onto the court with someone that doesn't have like the right shoes, or maybe they don't have the right racket, or maybe they brought like a hockey stick and you're like, what's going on here? Like some people don't have the tools when it comes to communication, and they just don't have the tools when it comes to the game of life. And he was basically saying that based on the type of player, which is like the person that you're dealing with, you're going to have to adapt. So if you're dealing with someone who has like no tools, in communication, you have to adapt to them and figure out like what are the ways that I can get through to this person, if at all. If at all, and maybe it's just like a no, then sometimes there are people that you cannot communicate with. There are people who will harm you. There are people who will just abuse their power of their access in your life. Yeah, so just adjust your playing style. That was one of the big ones. And one of the questions that I had was, I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm so scared. Like, what if I let in the wrong person? And he was basically saying, use your scanner. So using your scanner is when you're about to start the game, you look out there and you see, what does this person have? How are they? What's the vibe like? One thing that he said was, he's like, your spirit will always be suspicious. Like when you're connected to God, there are certain messages, and if you're Christian, you already know what time it is. There's certain messages that you will get where you're like, I gotta get out of here. I don't know what it is. It's something on my chest. It's just my intuition. I don't know. I'm sweating. I gotta get out of here. Like, you've just gotta get out of there. If you're kind of like, this person doesn't have the best intentions for me, 9 times out of 10, they don't. You're gonna be kicking yourself if you go against your intuition. Like, that is your radar. He was like, use your scanner. Another thing to add with that is, he also said, if you do feel suspicious, or you're going into a situation where you have to communicate with someone and it might not go the way that you want it to, or you might end up like you don't know what to expect, always, always, always have an exit strategy. So have an exit strategy where you're like, okay, you know what? This is going left. Like, I've got to close this out. I've got to go. One of the last things that we spoke about was basically the scale of like passive, assertive, and aggressive. Now, this was important to me because I felt like at points in life I was very passive. Like, people would kind of do things to me and I was just like, oh, like this sucks. But I would just kind of take it, and then I kind of became a little bit more aggressive. Like I was like, you get triggered sometimes and you're just like, you can't say that to me. Like, you can't say that to me. And just like being aggressive was just not something that you just don't want to be aggressive. But you also don't want to be on this scale of like people just doing stuff to you and you're just kind of like letting it slide. Like, it's okay. And it keeps on happening. Like, both ends of that spectrum are ridiculous. So when we spoke about it, he said, you never want to be, you were passive at one point and then you went aggressive, and which is, you don't want to be there either. So what you really want to be is assertive. Like, one term that it kind of stuck with me when he said this was brutal honesty. Like, you can be an honest person and express yourself without it being brutal. So it's kind of like you kind of always want to stay at assertive. Like it's a no. And if you feel like expressing yourself, express why. Like the power of saying no is something that will really protect you. Um, yeah, that was a big one. And that one kind of tied more into boundaries. Like if something's asking too much of you, where it's just too much, like everyone gets overwhelmed, and we're kind of getting in this energy where everyone's just like, oh, work, 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 and grind, 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 and do this and do that. But you also have to rest. Like everything in life is about balance. So you kind of, that was one skill that I really wanted to balance. So being assertive, being able to say yes, being able to say no, and not being afraid to say no, not being manipulated into saying yes, not being, confused or overwhelmed. We're just like, okay, fine, like not being pressured to say yes, like having the power to say no in terms of protecting yourself from like overwhelm, whatever you're protecting yourself from, saying no is essential. This was the most important piece of paper in my therapy journey. It completely changed the way that I do life. Like it completely changed the trajectory of my life. It made life manageable. It helped me connect back and closer to God. And I'm going to turn around. It'll probably be backwards, but I'm going to put it up on the screen. Now, at the top here, we have Spirit, which is Father God. This is your meaning, your value, your wisdom, and your guide. And then in the other part of the triangle, you have emotion. So emotion speaks to your inner child. There is a lot of stuff that we did in terms of like your inner child rescue. I don't know if you've ever heard of the inner child kind of like rescue kind of meditation exercise, I guess. So with your emotion, it's your feeling, your relationship, your bonding, and your empathy. And for the next part of the circle right here is your mind. So this is your adult self. This is your thinking, knowledge, conversation, and logical mind. So under your spirit is your spiritual intelligence. This is something that you need to be working on all the time. Um, Under emotional, that's your emotional intelligence. So regulating your emotions, resolving that trauma is a huge point in regulating your emotions. Unresolved trauma, unstable emotions, you just don't really want to be that person or even be around that type of person, because it breeds a very unstable environment, and that would be very difficult to thrive in. And for your adult self, this is kind of like you'll understand this point a little bit more, a little bit better, I would say, after 25. So that's your like intelligence, like your mental intelligence. Loving yourselves, create in your world a feeling of praising, encouraging, understanding, security, approval, acceptance, and friendship. Loving God, loving others, loving yourself, respect yourself, protect yourself, and care for yourself. Who doesn't want that in life? When he showed me this paper, let me tell you, I wanted this so badly. I was like, I will listen to whatever you and this was a man very connected to God. Like there were so many times that we had prayed in that therapy room, which was what I needed. So whether it's a loving relationship or like a friendship type relationship, this is it. And on the outside, he kind of said, add a bubble, tiny little bubble of physical intelligence. So that's obviously like eating right, taking care of yourself, exercising, stretching, all that jazz, and treating your body like a temple. That's a big one. We can do celibacy on another day. That's a really big one. One of the most essential. Yeah, so this is the diagram that changed my entire life. So we'll go into it deeper. Um, when I was calling, I had to call an agency to find my therapist. And I was about 19. I was so angry. I was angry at the world. I felt like I was by myself. Like, and in some ways I was, but I feel like I just didn't like the environment that I was in. I didn't like where I was. And so I wasn't, all of my friends had gone to like post secondary. I was not in post secondary. By the time that I actually went to therapy, I remember the person on the phone. There's only two questions that I remember they asked me. They asked me a lot of questions, but there was only two that I remember they asked me. One was, are you thinking of harming anyone or harming yourself? If your answer to either of those questions is yes, you do definitely need to seek help. I'm going to try and find some resources across North America where you can get that. And number two, they asked me, do you subscribe to any, like a specific faith? And I was so just, I was not, I was, God was close to me, but I was not close to God in that time. I had turned my back completely. I was like weed addicted. I was just damaging my brain. Like everything I was doing, I was just damaging my brain. So when they asked me that, I was so prepared to say no. Like, no. Just angry. No, I'm not. Just give me somebody. But in in my heart, I was like, yes. It just came out. Like when I think back to that, I'm like, was that like the voice of God telling me to say yes? And now I know that it was, because at no point did I want to like say yes to that question. The way that I was so bitter and miserable those times, I don't even know how I said yes, but I said yes. And they said, which one? And I said, Christian. Like, I didn't feel like a Christian. I wasn't nice to myself. I wasn't nice to people, really. I mean, I've always kind of been nice to people, but like people would do me dirty and I was like, oh, like, I was just angry. Just an angry person, just needed help, really. Just totally unstable emotions, really, really, really needed help. And now I have peace that doesn't even make sense. It does not make sense. If I could say one reason to go to therapy, it would be that. It's a level of like contentness. Like I am so comfortable now. I'm so at peace that like even when certain things happen, I'm just kind of like, this sucks. But I guess it's God's will. That's how you kind of fall down that rabbit hole that a lot of people, including myself at one point, had went down, which like the new age, like nobody wants to wait on God anymore. It is so important to wait on God, because when you're waiting on God, he's working. By the time you do something ridiculous that you know you weren't supposed to do in that waiting period, he's just going to be like, yeet, there's that blessing. There's that blessing. Take back, not really take back the blessing, but take back like he's not going to take your gifts. One thing that I learned like going to Bible study is that God will never take your gifts because he's already given you them, but he will take over, like he'll take back the covering. So, and sometimes even when you're like, wow, he should have took back the covering completely, you'll still see ways in which you're like, oh my gosh, I was so protected in that moment. Oh my gosh, I knew I shouldn't have went to that event or whatever, and something happened and people died or something. You're like, oh my gosh, I knew I should have taken that road home. Like when God calls you, he calls you. So when they asked me if I was Christian or what my faith was, I was like, Christian. I don't even know how I got it out. I was so bitter, but I got it out, and I was connected with the it was literally aligned by God. I was connected with the best person ever. And even I was so skeptical. I was like, oh my God, like this person was like not black, like literally the opposite of me. But I'm grateful that I had him. He was literally like an older white male. And I'm so grateful with the person that I was connected to, because that's one thing that he stressed to me was it's about the person. Someone could look the part, like we were talking about other stuff when we were talking about this, but he was saying it boils down to the person on a heart level. Who are they? What does their soul look like? Who is that person? Like, getting to know people on like a soul level is so important, because sometimes you'll get lost in like the way that somebody looks, or maybe their title, maybe even their title in your life. You know, they might be like a parent, or like a sibling, or a partner, or a friend. Like, the title comes, like, all of those things come last. He was basically saying it boils down to the heart and the person's character, and ultimately how they make you feel too. Like, is it a give and take relationship? Are you guys charging each other, right? So yeah, that was my therapy experience, and it was honestly so life changing. And I am literally in psychology now so that I can provide people with the same tools and the same information that was provided with me, for me. And I think that it's so important to kind of pass the baton, and really just, once you get to a place where you're happy and you're healthy, there's so many people who aren't. So it's important to give back. It's important to help. So Crystal Reeves, the therapist, is going to be coming soon. Hopefully, fingers crossed, I get all the good classes. But yeah, it's definitely something that changed the whole entire trajectory of my life. I do it every day, counseling people in my chair, the amount of craziness that I hear every day. So I don't know how it's going to tie in together, but it'll tie in together. That's all for now. Take care. Stay blessed. Stay blessed and take care. Until next episode.